Have you ever worked on a program or a policy where you tried to implement something, or you worked with a team that implemented something, and you get all the way down to the end of this thing and you push it out the door, or you make it happen, nobody notices, right? Or they notice because it busted everything because people just didn't pay attention to the subtleties of it. So the core to this is, if you're making a big change or you're trying to make something happen or you've got a policy, right? The thing only exists if it's broadly communicated and well understood. If you broadly communicate it and nobody pays attention or they don't understand the subtleties of it, it's a failure or it didn't happen, right? Or if people understood it, but you didn't communicate it to enough of the players in a way they actually paid attention to, then it didn't exist, right? So the positive version of this is it only exists if it was broadly communicated and well understood. The negative version of this is it didn't happen unless it was broadly communicated and well understood. Like, you can put anything out there and that doesn't mean anything to anybody, or anybody's going to pay attention unless it's broadly communicated and well understood. So what am I talking about? This could be a new program. It could be a new policy. It could be some internal thing or internal program or a reorganization of behavior. It could be an HR thing. You could be trying to do some inclusion piece, or you could be doing something else. But if it's not broadly communicated and well understood, then it doesn't matter, right? This could be some financial policy. You could change the way something happens, right? So you have an option of either trying to communicate this up front or trying to clean up the mess afterward. So how does this happen? It's because no one pays attention until it's important to them. Your crisis isn't their crisis, isn't interesting to them until it's their crisis. So assume no one is paying attention until they're actually impacted, or until somehow it's raised up to them. So you got to remember, your critical program or implementation is not as important as your partners or other people, their priorities. You have to make it important to them. You have to somehow increase the exposure of like what the issues are going to be for this or how they're impacted. I'm going to assume, I will tell you, if you tell me some new policy, that I'm not impacted unless there's a list of impacts given to it that one of them is mine or somebody told me that. I'm just going to assume if it was really bad for me, you would have told me that. Silence is not acceptance. Matter of fact, when it comes to major programs or changes, silence is avoidance or ignorance, right? They have no idea. The fact that if you're late in a project or late in an implementation and nobody has complained, you are doomed, right? No one says anything, you are doomed. That's probably what you should assume. How do you fix some of this? You got to learn how your partners operate. How do the other groups operate? Their problems with whatever you're doing will become your problems. People will claim they didn't know anything, right? And they will be broken, and you may have to roll something back. So even if it's not important to you, or you don't think you need to know the impacted parties, how it will impact them. Is there some way that you can break that out? So what is the kind of thing, the details of this? When you're creating or implementing a policy or some program, you need to identify the pitfalls for your partners, preferably before they do. Or you identify pitfalls and then figure out which partners would be impacted that. I recommend telling people they're going to be broken. We're doing this and you're going to be broken this way. I mean, you can hide it. Like, the other option is tell nobody anything and announce it and then complain that they didn't make it happen. But the reality is that's just going to go badly. Another one is explicit sign off, right? Like, this is the opposite of silence is acceptance. Teams have to sign off that they understand the impact of what you're doing and the timeline. And you can use macro communication in addition to individual communication. I like regular cadence and public forums. Now, sometimes you'll do office hours and they won't work out because nobody will dial in or nobody will contact you. And then you got to go back and somehow figure out a way to invigorate those groups to show up on a regular basis in your office hours or in your regular cadence meetings. I find also a lot of times people won't tell you you don't know everybody that's impacted by a change. it is best to go, hey, does anybody know of another team that might be linked into this that'll be impacted? Sometimes there's some back office thing or some tiny group somewhere or some major group that you don't realize how they're wired into this. So ask others, like ask friends of friends who's going to be impacted. And then, of course, the obvious one is move up the food chain. You can't do it early, but you got to make it at a point where teams or VPs or people in the right order level of the organization are actually apparent. A lot of times you'll do these things kind of in a bottom up, or you'll do this crazy top down thing, and then the people at the top will kind of ignore it. They'll just assume the people at the bottom are doing it. And a lot of times the people at the bottom aren't paying attention to everything their bosses say, because so much comes down and then dies off in some reorg, they don't pay attention. But still, it's good to move up the food chain and make sure everybody's on board. Another thing you can do is you can hold a mock implementation. That's actually a lot harder depending on the complexity of what you're doing, but it can work out. Occasionally something will come out of that, right? I would, for me anyway, it's always been assume when no one thinks you're serious, right? You're going to say, I'm turning off all the security in this building based on blah, 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 and people will need new key cards. And nobody's going to believe you because there's 4,000 people in there, and there's no way you're going to turn off those cards because people won't be able to get in or whatever. So you have to convince the people. Some people will never take you seriously, and you have to figure out who in that part of the org is going to pay attention. And this assumes you're serious, and it's not going to bag. The whole thing's going to fall apart, right? And convince the people around them that it's important. Right? This is knowing your partners and knowing the teams that are involved. My deal also is just assume there's going to be some 11th hour catastrophe. Optimism is not a plan, right? So communicate broadly, widely, make sure it's well understood, and assume that you will have missed some team at the end, and plan to have some alternative with that or people available to try and get that team on board. Assume you're going to have some emergency. It doesn't exist if it's not broadly communicated and well understood.